Hello everyone and welcome to this episode, the Sustainability one of the Women Talking About Learning podcast. I'm Andrew Jacobs. In today's rapidly changing world, the conversation around sustainability has evolved to encompass not just environmental concerns, but social issues as well. To discuss this further, we have three awesome guests. Our first guest is Natalie Ainsworth. Natalie brings more than a decade of global L&D experience across sectors including FTSE 100 and Fortune 100 organisations, with expertise spanning early career to leadership development. She's delivered enterprise-wide strategies, designed impactful learning solutions, and facilitated transformative learning experiences. Our second guest is Sara Hill. Sara is the founder of the Learning Green and Sustainability Learning Strategist. She has a background in landscape architecture and learning and development, is certified Carbon Literate and a Cornell Climate Steward. She's involved with Engineering for One Planet, the EOP network, which supports bringing sustainability into higher education engineering curricula. She's also a member of her town's Climate Smart Community Task Force. Our final guest is Dr. Asegul, or Ace, Hulus. Ace is an assistant professor in computing, researching across interdisciplinary areas of computer science. She's the founder of MetaTech Feminism, a novel framework that unifies feminist approaches to technology, advancing inclusivity, ethical responsibility, and sustainability in digital systems. Recorded at the end of March 2026, this is Women Talking About Learning. This is Natalie, Sara, and Ace talking about sustainability.
Hi, Sara. Hi, Natalie. Hope you both are well. It's so good to be here with you today talking about sustainability. But what I really wonder is, what brought you here today to this topic? Why this topic and not anything else? Sara, you want to start?
Yeah, thanks, Ace. So I heard about this episode being aired through Andrew, who's in my network from Global Learning and Development Community. And I'm a sustainability professional. My background is in landscape architecture and permaculture and such, education-wise. And through the years, I have been going between environmental side of things and education-related things, so training and whatnot. And previously to what I'm doing now, I was doing educational support with a nonprofit for green building professional certification, and now I have my own business helping professionals with sustainability literacy and climate literacy. So yeah, that's I was more than excited to be part of this podcast. But Natalie, what about you? What brought you to this podcast in sustainability and learning?
Thanks for sharing that, Sara. It's very similar to you, really. So my background is actually in learning and development, kind of worked in different capacities across the spectrum of learning in global organizations for like more than a decade. And during that time, I also retrained because I became interested in what sustainability meant more for me as an individual and embarked on some kind of further education in that and got my master's in it. And then it's really kind of led me to now work at the intersection of learning and sustainability after, like you, having some time as a sustainability professional, focusing a little bit more on the social side of sustainability with a little bit of the environmental aspect. And I think sustainability fundamentally is a people issue. It's a people agenda. And so I'm quite passionate about that. And one of the things I do now as well is work as a sustainability skills coach as well. So I'm just, very excited to share, I guess, my passion, my motivation for it, and hope to inspire others a little bit. Ace, how about you?
Thank you. It was lovely listening to you both. Well, let me first give you my background. I'm an assistant professor in computing, so I'm a computer science researcher, and sustainability is one of my research fields. So whether that be sustainability in, educational technologies, like we talked about learning and development as well, whether it's researching how the usage of AI is sustainability. Yet when I listen to both of you, the question that actually comes to my mind is, what do we define sustainability as? Because when we combine the background that we've spoken about, the three of us, that's what I want to talk about right now.
Yeah, that's great. For me, a few years ago, I came across some research related to the taxonomy of sustainability, which I really appreciated. It was out of 2 women out of Italy that did the research, and it was related to sustainability communications, how we communicate about sustainability and climate. And it broke it down kind of what we're probably familiar with being already in the sector of environment, people, economics, and governance. And that was like the top 4. And then they had different themes within it. So within environment was climate change. Within economic is like direct ROI kind of something or another. And then there's topics below that as well or whatever. And so I like how that structure was done. And, they researched a whole bunch of different reports from ESG reports and things like that or whatever to kind of create this list. But I feel like that gives like a nice overview of this is how sustainability looks kind of thing.
I think I'd be really interested to delve into that research, Sarah. So I might tap you up for it. Yeah.
Yeah, cool.
And I think it's a really great question, Ace, because I think when it comes to sustainability, it means different. I think it does mean different things to different people depending on potentially their lived experiences or where they are in the world. But also there is this, I think, immediate lean into environment as being what sustainability means. And I've had conversations with people where, that they're quite interested to learn that sustainability is actually much more broad than what we might consider ESG, which is a more narrow focus at an organization, like the organizational level to measure something, because we need to measure, right? But for me, sustainability, I think of it in like the absolute broadest sense. So anything that I think would limit current or future generations being able to kind of live and meet their basic needs. And that, really encompassing things like, poverty, access to food, access to water, kind of like sanitation, all of that stuff, as well as, our mental well-being, gender equality, including climate and environment as well. So yeah, really kind of very broad definition from my side.
I couldn't agree more with both of you. I mean, when I mix what both of you said, it comes to mind that sustainability is not just environmental factors. Yes, very important. Environmental factors are very important to our living situations and around the world to take care of the environment. But Natalie, you touched upon one topic that I am very passionate about in sustainability, and that is gender equality, which most people say that what's the point of doing, for example, research in gender equality in 2026? Well, you'll look back that 10 years ago, we're still in the same situation right now when it comes to equity. I mean, look, here we are, 3 women talking about learning, yet we probably have faced assumptions or have faced situations which have not made it sustainable for us to even carry on. I mean, most recently, I got called into a meeting and I was told I was not a computer scientist because I do research on equity of women in computing when I should be programming instead. So how sustainable is the future if we are not bringing up these conversations? How sustainable is a future for all gender identity in a sense if it's viewed that doing research in gender equity as a form of sustainability is not valid? I mean, I would love to hear both of your thoughts on this. Sarah, let's start with you.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm obviously totally in with the gender side. I started in the environmental side, but definitely, the social side of things I've done work in as well. And one thing that, brings to my mind is took us like a quiz or whatever. I think it was through Project Drawdown. But one of the main ways to combat climate is actually educating girls, because it has, effects on delayed pregnancy. You also have the women that can be part of the workforce, which helps economic development, and then also women take a harder hit when it comes to climate disasters, as well as, minority communities as well. But, and they're part of that household that has to bring back that household to surviving that economic and natural disaster. So all of those things kind of relate to just educating women equally kind of thing. So there's so much going on the social ends of things. I always think of the pyramid where you have your environmental sustainability kind of at the bottom, and that support your social sustainability, and that supports your economic. So if we want to be economically viable, we need to actually have our social sustainability, solid. And that relies on our environmental, because if we don't have good water, then we don't have it's one of those things that cascades and is all intertwined and interlinked. But yeah, our social foundations and social sustainability is super key, and equity is a huge part of that. Natalie, what about you?
I'd absolutely agree. And I love that you brought in there the kind of the framing of environment, social, and then the economic layer. And I think it's quite easy for us to assume that, that the layer that matters the most is that economic layer, but actually it's the framing of our economy doesn't exist if we don't have a stable environmental foundation. If we don't have that, our social sustainability needs met as well, we aren't going to have a productive economy or a productive kind of output there. And there's, to your original question, Ace, there is a lot of research that indicates a high correlation with when we have kind of gender diversity that's equal, we're in that kind of equity space. We've got the parity, leadership outcomes, enable better risk management, longer term decision making, kind of a more stakeholder oriented approach and governance to things. And so these are the sorts of things that are also required and I guess could be seen as conditions needed for sustainability decision making as well. And so as well as the things that you were talking about, Sarah, around the kind of the disproportionate effects at the gender level from sustainability related issues like climate disasters, etc. The impacts of that are felt more for women and children specifically. Not even bringing in kind of some of the gender gap in green skills and STEM, is very much your space there. So yeah, it's the gender kind of conversation in it is really fundamental. Ace, I'd love to hear a bit about your thoughts, given your area of work in this as well.
Well, everything you said kind of like sparks something in my brain. First, I want to give an example. Okay, so we had like an open day. And, the parents come in, their kids are coming out of college, high school, both terms used here. And, they come up to us and they ask about our computing programs, for example. So usually for male students, it's like, oh, this is a good program, right? But when it comes to a female approaching us, like a teenager, the parents always ask us, are you sure this is the right career for my daughter? So when I think about everything you both said, it's about, I totally agree that, with the good environment, and then, social and then economics. Would you both agree that we need some kind of sustainable training done, not in just the industry, but in education, maybe even public-wise, because we have these stereotypes that women are not sustainable in male-dominated fields like STEM, right? And perhaps we, in a way, need to make our own training for this, and get the girls, maybe we bring the high school girls like, look, I'm an assistant professor in computing. I study computing, or take them to the industry. Look, she studied computing, she's working, she's programming, just for them to see that it's possible, for women to be in this field. Because I also had a student come up to me, a master's student. She said, I'm so glad you were on the panel because it was just 5 men and you gave me hope that it's possible for women to be in this field. And I just died inside. Like she thought that she cannot make it, not because of her skills, but because of her gender.
Representation.
Yeah. Exactly. So there is a lack, if we can say that, there is a lack of representation in terms of sustainability that actually feeds these stereotypes into the social setting.
I agree. Representation is key across like all the fields, because you think about it like in specific sectors of sustainability, say like clean energy, like who do you think of who has clean energy? Like, even as a woman, I'm thinking most of the people like doing the actual on the, developing of like solar panels in the field and solar fields is going to be more men. And that's wrong for me to think that, because it should be equally. But I do think at this point, there's more men doing that kind of work. And those jobs pay differently than the job of, the clean energy, like engineers or something like that, which might be a little bit more, equitable in terms of distribution between men and women. but still probably not. So there's definitely like across any of those fields, there's definitely gender diversity issues.
Yeah.
And I think when we're, doing education, like you said, Ace, being on the panel, like making sure like we're at least some woman, some, person of color, some, whatever, get that diversity out there to show and help support that representation for anyone who's going into these fields so that they feel like they can be part of that conversation and sustainability when they're going through their education and everything.
Do you know what I always say? I say that people expect change to happen instantly, but really it's just drop by drop. If we, collect waters drop by drop, it creates a wave of change. As long as, if I help one person see that they belong, then they will turn around and help someone else. Mm-hmm. And, it just creates a ripple effect. And maybe this is what we're missing, in a way. Natalie, what would you like to add to this?
Yeah, I would say, not to speak on your behalf, Sarah, but I feel like the question around kind of like the need for education, I feel like, preaching to the choir here around like the need for that. But I like to talk about sustainability as a mindset shift. And so if we're to the example of like, we're talking about representation in panels and being able to see, it's like if we embody them, if we are actioning from a sustainability perspective, if we're adopting that sustainability mindset, we're thinking about intentionally how we're designing panels or, conversations like this, the spaces where decisions are made, to me, that is true sustainability, where actually the mindset is then just embedded into the way we're viewing problems, the way we're looking to solve them, the decision-making kind of outcomes, the representation of voices that we're bringing into it. We can bring that mindset into every space we operate in. And that's why I think sustainability is so relevant for us to be talking about as a skill for everyone, not just, technical, the green skills that are deemed to be technical, some of the things we're talking about in maybe like an energy transition and green energy, etc. It's also behavioral, and all of us can adopt those mindsets to bring more sustainable practices in, even if it is just, Ace being invited onto a panel to ensure that there is female representation there.
Yeah. I totally agree. I mean, this actually reminded me, there's this thing called the TPAC framework, and it's like technology and pedagogy and content. And it talks about the social dimension, the technological dimension as well, and how we have to design, even coming from a learning and development lens. I'm preaching to the choir for Natalie from her learning and development side. Like when we're designing courses or designing programs, we need to consider these sustainable aspects. I mean, even making a simple presentation slide, right? And you have to, you put figures, so it's visually there, it looks good. Most of the time I see figures where there is no representation, it's just male. At least put a diverse figure. And like, I've seen a lot of like green engineering adverts coming from Sarah's thing. And I remember Andrew told this before as well. And like, they're all featuring men. Like, where's the women? Because the first woman who invented programming, the formula for it was Ada Lovelace. Yeah. A woman invented programming, and programming was a woman's job. It was like a secretarial job till it started getting, money. It started bringing in the flow, and it suddenly shifted to a male-dominated field. So this is coming back to what Sarah said about the economic of it as well, and the social setting. So we also have this thing where women are being pushed out of fields. Yeah, where they're making money,
And that crosses, not just programming, it crosses like all fields. Like, once there's money in it, women are pushed out and men come in and take over of sorts. Yeah, in terms of, there's a lot of talk. I remember a number of years ago, like seeing a lot of stuff with diversity images, right? For accessibility, people of color and things like that. And what I find, like when I try to, you've tried to find stock images, or something close to it or whatever for your business for marketing and stuff, and you want to show this diversity, and it's like, it's not there. And then it's like, well, I don't necessarily want to use AI for the sustainability aspect of it, and the fact that it's taking jobs even, from actors and models to whatever kind of thing. But it winds up being like, there's that option with having some potentially some extra fingers and things like that, or, you don't have showing the diversity. So like there's not enough, I feel like, stock imagery that's actually showing this breadth of diversity of people in those different skill positions and in sustainability related professions. And to go to Natalie, what Natalie was kind of like saying before is like, it's not just like technical, things. It's, you can be an accountant and be, have green skills. You can be in any role there possibly is and have sustainability skills or whatever. And it's just, there's not that breadth of diversity in the images to help show that representation yet either.
So absolutely every role is a sustainability role, and I fundamentally and wholeheartedly believe that. I wonder if also some of the challenge to the point that you made, Ace, around kind of like male representation there in things that we're seeing potentially around kind of adverts, etc., or the spaces for green transitions. I wonder if part of the problem is the inherited problem of the historical misrepresent or kind of underrepresentation of women within STEM in general, coupled with potentially the urgency of the transition that we need to make. And so it's trying to, I guess, draw upon the majority within that field to make it desirable for them to make a shift from potentially what they're already doing into a more green technical job. And therefore it's targeted advertising based on the fact that there is a majority to target, right? But that is based on historical, I don't know what you think about this, but that's my thought process around some of it is we're dealing with historical issues and they remain present day issues, to your point earlier, Ace, and at that system, like the system level, we need change, but we also within our organizations can drive some of that change by kind of creating opportunities for this green skilling, whether it's technical green skills or more professional green skills, like the skills anyone can use, like critical thinking, innovation, problem solving, systems thinking, all of these things that are entirely relevant, collaboration within sustainability to drive sustainable practice. But going back to that organizational level, we can create those learning opportunities and we can be quite intentional about how we bring women into that and bring them on the journey so that we're enabling a more of a just transition. The systemic level is still problematic, right? And there's limits at the individual level what we can do about that. But I do think it remains an issue to unpick. But I'm hopeful. I am hopeful. But I wonder what you think about that, Ace, because this is your area. You're working within STEM. That is just my observation and my thoughts on it. I'd be interested to hear your perspective.
First, I love how you both answered how to overcome this. And while you both were talking about this, what I thought about as well is algorithmic bias. So algorithm-wise, is that if you, for example, on the most simple, go to ChatGPT and say to it, generate me a picture of a hacker, generate me a picture of an engineer, right? And it will generate you most of the time a male, unless you specifically prompt. So the way you've both position it as well, it is, the history is embedded into this so much that AI has picked it up, and this bias, it feeds on our algorithm. So when we're talking about how to overcome this, not only is AI, in terms of sustainability, the water consumption wise, is eating it up, it's also about, it's feeding the bias as well. So AI is both environmentally damaging and sustainability wise, in terms of diversity, it's damaging. And there's a lot of, research on this as well. I mean, most recently, I also looked into there's a lot of different feminist types. Like I have MetaTech Feminism, there's cyber feminism, trying to combat this all. But it's feeding off so much data from the past that, like you both said, we need to integrate this in a way, train it, to understand that this is not the way, So I think this acts as how do we overcome this? But how do we overcome it on a more lower level so we can combat the higher level? I feel like we need to start small in order to catch the big fish, as they say, first you put the small bait. So I think in terms of, again, it goes back to the learning development side and with Sara's research as well and environment as well. How can we combine this all, to combat this?
That's the question.
Yeah.
That is the question. I mean, we started off like talking about like sustainability covers so many things, right?
Yeah.
So combining it all is actually really difficult. I think it's almost at a small scale, I think it's impossible in some ways, right? Like I think because, right, we as learning professionals, we understand cognitive load. Like you can't overwhelm your people. So you need to start with like knowing where they're at, chunking the material, and then like expanding it or whatever in whatever ways that you're working, right? Having a business is like start with the marketing, like, and just like see where people are at, because marketing is a learning kind of thing too. You start with pre-assessments in a training of some sort that figures out where they're at, and then you kind of work from there, just slowly building that change. And I think to Natalie's point before about like mindsets and things like that, you start with like these, things that be like, there's all these myths out there, right? Like, and you don't know what people know for truth and what's myth or whatever in your audience. So like bringing that to the front and like start challenging those and just having a discussion. It's not about lecturing and dropping content necessarily on them. It's, if you want that systems change, you have to change that mindset. And so having those discussions and like, why do you believe this? And if it's because of the ad, just because it's funded by big money or whatever, then, that's not like the answer. Like, where's the solid research? Where's the data? Where's your own observations that actually probably, of the world that probably actually are legit once you start thinking about them? People are seeing flooding. If you think about when you were a kid, what the weather's like versus now, it's probably drastically different, especially if you've lived in the same place and have that ability to compare.
Yeah.
So just bringing those kind of conversations to that local and personal level, I think is really important with any of what we do to change those mindsets to then build and expand to actually then get to all of sustainability. But we have to start small.
Yeah, I totally agree, Sarah. Like at the individual level, like to get to the mindset, there is an education gap. An education gap needs to be plugged in some way, and a foundational level of sustainability literacy needs to be established. Whatever organizational context that is in. So whether it's education, whether it's within an organization, whether it's at the community or societal level, individually we need the right information and like you say, Sarah, like research backed, data driven, accurate information to educate. And then the learning part comes in after that, where we start to maybe think about, because like as to both of your points, like it's so broad, it's so big, and it can feel not only overwhelming but also quite anxiety inducing, particularly when you're becoming more informed about the issues. And so bringing it back to, okay, what is in my sphere of control? What can I do? And how do we contextualize a lot of this information within organizations for what people can actually do in their roles? Like what is possible? What is achievable?
Yeah.
And how can I have an impact for my organization towards their net zero strategy, or for something else that, they have a goal on? Maybe it's around community investment, that social value aspect. Potentially it's another environmental goal around waste reduction or biodiversity, or, whatever it is we want to enable employees to be able to have an impact in. It's really thinking about the contextualization for them, I think, and start to try and, bring it back from the potential overwhelm, the potential anxiety, which are real elements to this topic, which I think also puts people off, right? It's a lot of the media coverage that we see is it's very rarely positive. Like this planetary boundary has been breached, Paris Agreement is dead, like all of this kind of unhelpful language around it. And I think then people start to think, well, what's the point? And actually, like there's still very much a point. Every degree matters. Every contribution to biodiversity matters. Every water conservation effort that we're implementing, everything matters, because it's the cumulative effect of it. It's not. It's not just individuals working in isolation. We're all in this together. So yeah, I think that's kind of my approach to it. But it's 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 an ongoing conversation.
Well, they do say learning is a lifelong process.
Yes.
So
Yes.
that is something to, which actually brings the point. I mean, for example, social value is now a requirement in all public sector contracts in the UK. And it's interesting to see how it's been addressed. But what I notice is, for example, Prude University now requires students to take an AI course, AI digital literacy course, okay, as a requirement for graduation, no matter what they're studying. So why can't we have a sustainability course which covers, the aspects of sustainability, in different chunks? Why can't this be a requirement? If social value is now a requirement, in the UK, like we talked about public sectors, why not bring this to education? Make a sustainable course that gets updated, as things get updated around the world, because we also have different like privacy laws, for example, sustainability laws. UNESCO comes out with the 16 sustainable goals. These constantly get updated. So why not have these courses?
Yeah, and it's a really good call out, Ace, because education is an example of social value. So educating your employees on a particular topic within sustainability. So for instance, climate, or, potentially it's around a material issue for your organization in particular, that, that does count towards your social value goals. So education is so important within sustainability. And I don't, we talk a lot about behavior change in learning, and I do, I mean, I'm repeating myself a little bit here, but like education within this topic is absolutely essential to enable behavior change, because we need to know that the behaviors that we're implementing or that we're adopting are legitimate in terms of the positive impact. Like you can go and plant a tree, but are you planting the right tree in the right place? Because if you're not, you're causing damage to the environment. So, we do need that educational layer. And I think that social value piece within the public sector contracts, I think is a really positive step forward. But again, I would challenge like how it's being measured and what we're actually achieving there.
Yeah, and I have, something to say about that, but also kind of leads into a question I have. And so I think I'll start with the question and then kind of answer it for myself, I guess, and pass it on. Is like, what are, Natalie, you kind of mentioned like there's all this doom and gloom around sustainability and climate, right? So I just kind of want to like, let's wrap it up with like some positivity, right? Kind of thing. In terms of like, what have you seen recently? Like maybe like the last month, 6 months tops though, right? That gives you hope that you see progress, whether it's directly in your line of work or it's come across your desk or computer screen, kind of thing. For me, like last night, I'm a Cornell Climate Steward. I went through that program last fall, and it's a climate literacy, program in New York State. But the Climate Stewards is across the country, but the Cornell Climate Stewards is New York State based. So there was like a Q1 like review meetup or whatever, and one of the groups presented what they worked on. And in Western New York, they had some political shifts over the last few years that allowed them to put through a comprehensive plan that is sustainability oriented. It actually specifies sustainability sections and what they're going to do related to that. And that just passed this last week. I'm like, woohoo, yay. So yeah, like things are moving forward. And then the state in general also is rolling out in the next 2 years climate literacy requirements for high school graduation. So it's starting with like the high school students requiring it in every grade level and either a specific class or embedded into whatever classes they have. There's a choice, but it's going to roll out to pre-K or kindergarten level too the following year. So that's happening in that movement so that, our workforce, at least in New York State, as people graduate, will have this basic knowledge of climate. And so those are, I feel like, 2 fun wins in my neck of the woods, as they say. Ace, what about you?
With me, this is such a heartwarming story for me. So I'm part of ACMW, and we have chapters around the world, as a short brief. And we have this chapter in India called ABS, and they're bachelor students. So they went to an orphanage that doesn't have any, laptops, internet, anything. They bought their laptop to get the kids used to like coding, and taught them coding on paper and everything. So in a way, sustainable education, like what this shows for me is like, it doesn't matter what level you're at. So you can be at the beginning, right?
Yeah.
And you can still do sustainable practices for education, for the environment. They also did some kind of recycling stuff. And like, this is the future generation teaching the future generation sustainable practices. And I'm like, it's an ongoing, ripple effect, like we said. So that really warmed my heart that the future generation is doing more. And here's a call out, doing more than the current industry and academia for sustainability. And it's something that they should learn from these students. So yeah, that was for me.
Yeah.
Nice.
Natalie?
That's really lovely. Thanks, Ace, for sharing that. And I love the democratization aspect of that, like breaking down barriers for access to opportunities. I have a lot of apprentices that I coach on a sustainability apprenticeship, and 90% of my learners that I talk to on a daily basis are not in a sustainability role. They're in a role, so going back to every role is a sustainability role. Their core function, their core job isn't in an ESG team or anything like that. And so I'm inspired every day by the conversations I have with them, by the growth that they're on, the journey that they're on in terms of their learning, and how they are proactively identifying opportunities for projects that they can just implement in their own roles, and the sustainability practices that they're bringing into their organization, the contribution they're having on waste reduction, the circular economy practices they're bringing in, all of these things that probably felt very foreign to them before they started the apprenticeship, but now they're like, a few months in, and they're just kind of away with it, and they're so energized and motivated and overcoming barriers every day. And it's just, for me, that just gives me so much hope, because I'm witnessing every day ordinary people in ordinary roles doing amazing things for the environment, for social sustainability, for governance metrics for their organizations. They're actually having an impact, and it's the beauty of learning. And I feel privileged to be a part of it.
That's awesome.
I mean, these are like beautiful moments for us. I guess this kind of leads into our final segment of what advice would we give to the listeners about sustainability and learning that they may take forward, just like our apprentices and our areas did. What kind of advice can we give them? Sarah, would you like to start?
So what struck me a few years ago or whatever, I heard Susie Miller talk about accessibility. She actually has done a podcast with a woman talking about learning on accessibility. But she mentioned quiet accessibilizing. So like quietly just doing the work on accessibility. And I feel like the same needs to be done for sustainability. Like, we can, you don't need someone up above you saying like, do this or don't do this. You just do it because it's good. So, for me, I think there's easy things of, just optimizing images and stuff like that, and your basic practices in developing content for learning. We can reduce our digital footprint, which reduces our energy and physical footprint. So I think that's one of the quick and easy ways to kind of go about things and get a start. Natalie, what about you?
I wholeheartedly agree with that. And I think I would add to that saying, have conversations, talk to people. It also the impact we can have grows and grows the more we have conversations about these things, and we surface perspectives, and we find opportunities, and we learn, from this conversation. I've learned a few things I want to go away and look at, so the power of conversation is really important, I think, in this. So I would say, be open to conversations, be open to opportunities that might come your way.
That's great. Yeah.
Ace,
Yeah.
How about you?
Well, I would like to say, metaphorically, I would like to say a quote. Now, I'm not talking about age. So don't listen to the dinosaurs or you'll end up like them. Now, what does that mean? It means walk your own path for a sustainable future. There is a lot of buzz going around, and this is what leads to, even for gender diversity, misrepresentation. You walk your path, you know what you're doing, you make the changes, and you just stand your ground, and you'll be able to walk the path to a sustainable future. And you'll set an example for others, and one day you'll be a mentor And you'll have your mentee as well.
That's great.
Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah,
it's been so lovely.
Great talking with you both, Natalie, Ace. It was amazing.
Yeah, it was lovely. It was lovely. Thank you so much for everything. And we wish all the listeners a sustainable future in which they can thriving.
What another top episode. By embracing sustainability, we can foster a more sustainable future that benefits all individuals, whether by advocating for educational reforms, supporting gender equality initiatives, or participating in sustainability efforts in your community. A huge thank you to Natalie, Sarah and Ace for their time, and you find all their details along with links to the subjects that they spoke about in the show notes. We are still looking for guests for upcoming episodes, and if you'd like to find out more, then please do email us. Details are in the show notes. Remember to like and subscribe to the podcast on your podcast player. It really does make a difference in helping people find and recommend us. We're back in a couple of weeks, and next time it's the advice one. As always, thanks for listening, and we'll see you again soon.